There's so much more to music than simply playing the notes. In fact, sometimes a good stage presence can make a good show a great one. More on that now with your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
Okay, Matt, here's a funny topic.
Okay.
Let's talk about being a musician versus being a performer.
Okay.
Or maybe being a musician and being a performer.
And being a performer.
Because this is one thing that we didn't really focus on a whole lot in school. I don't think it certainly wasn't a prerequisite to be a performer, to graduate, to get our degrees in music. But being a part of a performance ensemble was certainly a part of that.
Right, yeah.
And there's just a couple of things that I think are kind of interesting about how it contributes to the overall experience. Let me start by saying that I kind of took my music appreciation course a little bit later into the system, where I was already into the music theory when I was taking my music appreciation course. And it helped me out. I would actually recommend that. It might help you. Well, it's just one of those courses, humanity courses that you kind of have to have as a part of your humanities requisite.
Right. I remember we had a colleague that did that his senior year. He had already all but had a music degree, and
then
he went back and took music appreciation. I think he only showed up on class for the test, but
probably nailed it too, huh?
Yeah, nailed it. Yeah.
Well, one of the funny things that I thought that my music appreciation teacher had us do, because we had to go and attend a concert, of several of them actually.
Right.
And part of the questionnaire, she kind of sent us a little sheet that said, here's some things I want you to notice, some things I want you to look for and listen for, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. And among this list was, what did the performer look like? How are they dressed? How do they present themselves? What were their physical features? What were their facial expressions? How did they move?
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot to be said about how that contributes to the overall experience.
Yeah, it's sort of genre specific, isn't it? I mean, if you're a violinist in an orchestra, you're going to dress a certain way, you're going to move a certain way, or kind of try not to move in a certain way. They try not to be distracting and that sort of.
Because they're more part of the whole.
Yeah, they're a part of a whole. Whereas, if you're in a heavy metal band, you're going to dress very differently from that and move very differently from that. So there's sort of an interesting set of observations to make about what kind of music you're listening to and how the people in that musical style are reflecting the culture that birthed that style. Mm-hmm. I mean, I always think of people that play bluegrass. You wouldn't really think much of a bluegrass band that showed up in three-piece suits, right? I mean, you might. They might be great musicians, but there would be something off about that. To me, anyway, I almost always expect bluegrass people to be, or people playing in bluegrass bands to look the part, to look like a bluegrass
Very
band.
casual.
Casual, yeah.
Blue collar.
Right, yeah.
Although, if they do dress up, it's probably some kind of gimmick.
Yeah, right.
I've actually seen a lot of live bluegrass, and it seems like I've noted on several occasions that the mandolin player is always kind of like really deep into his instrument and just kind of standing there into it, where like the rhythm instruments, like the guitar, the dobro guys, banjo, are moving around a bit more, and even the bass player sometimes. Oh, here's another point. I took cello from this gentleman, Craig Holtgren, who plays.
Oh, yeah.
At the time he played with the ASO.
Right.
And now I'm not going to say I'm his cello student. That was his grasshopper, because he probably wouldn't want me to say that, because I only spent, I probably took about 10 lessons from him tops.
And practiced for how many of those before?
Very few. And it was all crammed practicing. But it was really more to get theory. I mean, I knew theory. I knew how to read music. I really wanted to know technique from him.
Right.
But part of his teaching was also get yourself a mirror, play in front of the mirror. Watch how you perform. So there's something to that, how it affects people. If you're the bass player for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, you're going to jump around on stage like a flea.
He does, anyway.
And if you're playing a Dies Irae, maybe you're brows are furrowed and you're kind of stern. Whereas if you're playing Vivaldi, the springtime, maybe you're smug but positive looking. You're happy but smug. You know?
I don't know if it gets that deep. Well, some people, some people I don't think even can help it, right? I mean, they just do that just because they're feeling the music.
It takes over. And that's probably, that to me, that indicates that the music is moving them.
Right.
And to me as the viewer or the listener, that somehow jacks up the entertainment value or the interest or the emotional value. You know what I mean?
I can see where it makes it easier to have an empathic connection with the music itself. Mm-hmm. You can sort of abstract that to this larger question of, is the performer or the musician being moved by the music a necessary requirement for you to be moved by the music, for the listener to be moved by the music? How do those two relate, and how does the performer being moved facilitate the audience being moved? Again, it can be a very genre-specific thing. Mm-hmm. You can be listening to a Mahler symphony and nobody on stage is moving any more than they have to play their instruments. Mm-hmm. But it's extremely powerful music. So how does that differ from... you mentioned Red Hot Chili Peppers or Beastie Boys or something like that, where they're moving a lot,
thrashing about.
Yeah, and their audience also moving a lot, right? Yeah. Compared to the audience of a Mahler symphony,
sitting very still, and listening intently.
Yeah. So what is the difference between? It seems now that we're talking about it, it feels like there's two different things that are happening, or at least there's a difference in the two things that are happening there. What is that difference?
As a determining factor, I guess venue also kind of comes up. Now, you're generally going to see a classical concert in a classical concert venue or a nice prestigious hall of some kind. Yeah. Where of course they're going to dim the lights. You're going to sit down. Yeah. You're not going to talk. Or like a music listening room. If you're going to go see a singer songwriter, oftentimes you don't expect them to get up and they're just going to be sitting down in their instrument.
Yeah.
You'll often see the passion in their eyes or in their faces,
Right.
Especially if it's a story that their own story that relates to them. But I do think it contributes. I think it, like, if I see a show, okay, here, let me go back to it as an example to get kind of my starts. I've played in several bands, as I've mentioned probably before. Mm-hmm. And when I first got into it, I loved the music so much, and I wanted to share it with people so much, but I was not great about getting up on stage and doing it,
Right.
To the extent that it would practically take me, I swear, like a pint of whiskey to get up there the first time.
A pint?
A pint of whiskey.
That's a lot of whiskey, man.
Whiskey. And then I narrowed it down to a half pint.
You were getting easier.
Once the nerves, I got over the nerves. I don't recommend you guys going out there and drinking a pint of whiskey.
For any reason.
For any reason, in one sitting or in one night, for that matter. And a pint might have been a bit of an exaggeration, but it was really a matter of what I'm getting at is it was a matter of nerves, and I found a way to shatter those nerves with booze, and then managed to just kind of
liquid courage,
trail it off to where I'm down to a beer a set. But I've done it so many times I don't even need that because I'm used to it.
Right.
But then once I got over the nerves, I was like, well, how can I? Because I looked back at some video footage. I saw some old video footage of me, and it was just like, I was such a boring guy just standing there. I might bob my head a little bit, but for the most part. And then as a bass player, maybe it wasn't required me to be too,
Well, that's an interesting aside. Why is it less required of the bass player than of other? Does the bass player just have this reputation as being the stoic for some?
I think
we're both bass players, we should say, just as a reminder.
So I think as bass players we can answer this question.
I think we can. I think we should.
Well, here's my opinion of the whole thing. We're more background. We're more backdrop. We're the rhythm section. Mm-hmm, There's often something interesting going on in the lead vocals or the guitar riffs that we can step back and just support it. And the personalities involved.
Right. Yeah.
For myself, like I said, introverted. It took me some whiskey to get up there.
Sure. Yeah.
So. Unless you're like someone like Les Claypool or Flea or one of the more front bassists, that's one of the positions where you're it's acceptable to be chill,
Yeah.
But even at some point, I got to where I was like, I began to get into a character. I was like, you're not Jeremy Burns anymore. You're an actor. You are.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started moving around a little bit more, maybe jumping around some.
Yeah.
And man, what a difference it made. just from me observing how the crowd reacts to me and how the crowd reacts to the overall show.
Right.
How many bands are so fraught with amazing musicians but they just don't have the personalities to make a show versus a musical experience, you know?
Right, yeah. I kind of had a similar experience, the whole acting thing. I think I was definitely, back when I was playing in rock and roll bands and things like that, I was definitely inhabiting a persona.
Uh-huh.
You know, I had sort of created the rock and roll version of me, who is a lot more extroverted than the real version of me. Probably a little more arrogant than the real version of me, you know, and definitely somebody that could get up there and act like a rocker, whereas the regular me might not do that. And that's the difference was not in how I felt about the music, because those feelings didn't change, you know. The difference was in how I chose to express how I felt about the music, you know, which can go back to, you know, the difference between, you know, a concert of the Dropkick Murphys versus a concert of string quartet music or something, you know. They both may be feeling the music and being moved by the music to the same extent. It's just for one group, expressing that overtly and outwardly is a part of what they're doing, when it's less a part of what the other group is doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which brings back to that question: why? What is the difference between those two things? That those two different dynamics both exist. It's an interesting thing to ponder.
But it's one of these things, like I said, you know, I don't remember them stressing that when I was in school, but I noticed once I got out of school that I kind of wish they had talked a little bit about that, because it did make a big difference. And I think that musicians might give themselves more opportunities if they emote. I'm not talking about everyone jumping around like a bunch of lunatics.
Morons, yeah.
But yeah, and people will know if you're falsely emoting, you know what I mean?
I think
And when
so.
I say I was acting, I meant really that I was kind of maybe
Inhabiting a persona.
or exaggerating my emotions towards the music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're not feeling the music and you're just kind of sitting there, you know, just not really getting into it or being boring, people are going to be like, well, sounds good, but I'm not getting a whole lot out of this. I feel like, you know what I mean? Not like, okay, a jazz show. Not like a sit down kind of thing.
Yeah.
Jazz musicians can get away with being laid back. It is more about the music. People are there to experience the music.
So is there a level of intellectualism where if you think, okay, if I'm going to a classical music or a jazz concert, you're not really expecting a whole lot of outward emotive content from the musicians, because you presume they're devoting most of their mental energy towards the concentration required to play this very sophisticated music, whereas if you go to a Metallica concert, you know, you're sort of presuming that they can play the music. You know, they're also responsible for entertaining you or something like that.
Going back to what you said earlier, maybe it is genre specific, because I think there is some emotional. I guess like a symphony guy is going to be emoting still, but maybe way more subtle than.
He's going to be feeling the music, I think. You know, he's going to be moved by the music, but the social parameters in which he is involved do not really permit or require him to outwardly express that.
Yeah.
You know, whereas, I mean, I mentioned Metallica. They used to kind of catch a lot of flack for not moving around a lot. Back in the day, I'm not going to say how old I am, but they used to catch flack for that.
They were a standstill, but they would headbang, but they would still stand still, if I remember.
Ironically enough, given our previous conversation, the bass player was good about doing the whole propeller head thing.
Cliff Burton, you mean, at the time?
Well, Cliff Burton, and then later Jason Newsted.
Yeah.
You know, but the singer slash guitarist was singing, and then the other guitarist, Kirk Hammett, who is like this shred master genius, sort of had that veneer of intellectualism. You know, he's like supposed to be this really good, you know, guitar soloist, and so he's over there concentrating on that.
You know, he's got to do that to pull off what he's doing.
Right.
He can't just do it spinning around 360 degrees while doing that.
That would be pretty awesome if he could, but yeah, no, I don't think he can.
Then
the drummer nobody ever sees. You assume the drummer's back there.
Yeah, behind all those drums.
Yeah.
Where was I going with this whole thing, though? It's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I love derailing.
What's the takeaway?
What's the takeaway from all this? Does there have to be a takeaway?
Not really. Not really.
It's Zen. There is no takeaway. There's
I just think it's.
experience.
I think as music students, it's something you should all consider. And it sounds a little vain and silly, but maybe look at yourself in the mirror and see what you look like when you perform. You know, see what you look like
Right.
from the viewer's perspective and from the listener's perspective, because it shouldn't be at all about the visuals. It should be really about the music, but the visuals surely contribute.
Yeah, and I don't know. Again, we say that, and we say it shouldn't be at all about the visuals. But I think in some instances, the visuals can sort of tell the audience how they should react. The way the musicians choose to express or not express, and the degree to which they choose to express or not express their how they feel about the music, sort of gives the audience permissions to react in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and thereby, I think heightening the emotional impact.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
the experience, so people can say, "I went to a show.
Right.
I went to a performance,"
Yeah.
compared to "I went to see this band."
Yeah. It's that's important for a lot of people. We hate to ruminate on this reality being musicians, but a lot of people out there, the music itself is kind of background noise. They don't know what a chord is necessarily. They don't really understand what you're doing.
Right. It's impressive enough that you're standing there holding an instrument.
Yeah. I think to a certain extent, a lot of people, they're going to be able to judge how they feel about you by how much feeling you express to them through avenues other than the music you're playing. And I think it becomes especially important to people who are dealing with, if you're playing in a cover band, you're playing music they've all heard before. There's nothing new with that. It becomes even more important to have some way of making that exciting.
Yeah, because you've heard Freebird 1,000 times and you've played it 1,000 times.
Yeah, and they've heard Freebird 1,000 times.
And they've seen it 1,000 times.
And seen it 1,000
So how
times.
can you make it more interesting for them? What can make your version stick out?
Yeah.
So maybe what you do physically is a part of that. you know?
Yeah, well, that's about the only option you have. I mean, you can't not play Freebird, right?
And you can't rewrite
You
Freebird.
sure can't rewrite Freebird, so what are you going to do? This is why I didn't like to play in cover bands. Talking about not feeling the music. I was not moved by the music. I did not feel this music at all. Yeah.
And typically, if you're in a cover band, you're probably playing music decided by 25% your approval, or at the very least, it's like
Yeah.
somebody else in the group said, "Let's do this," and you're like, "Okay,
Okay.
I like that one. Let's do that."
Yeah, well, my experience playing in cover bands was you're choosing your repertoire based on what you think people in the bar want to hear. Period. It's not even a matter of people in the band wanted to do this. I mean, maybe in some cover bands, but in the really hardcore, doing this for the money kind of cover bands, it's purely, this is what's popular now. Go get a CD of it. We'll learn it at the next practice and play it at the next gig, and that's what happened.
It was homework,
It was homework.
and then you had to take the test.
Yeah, or more like it was training, and then you had to go out on the job.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Even better.
Yeah, and not musically fulfilling to me. I probably had the wrong attitude about it. I looked at it as a job, as something, I would love to hear from someone at some point that enjoyed playing in cover bands a lot more than that, and get their perspective, because I think maybe I had the wrong attitude, because definitely.
You know what? There's another podcast right there.
There is playing in cover bands.
Yeah, because
there's a big difference, right? I mean, you play in an Irish and Celtic folk band, essentially, sort of. So in a way, those are all covers, but somehow that's a much different kind of cover than covering Sweet Emotion or
right, covers that the mainstream USA have not heard,
right, yeah,
or anyone in this decade
has heard,
or
anyone in this country or in this decade,
or the previous couple of decades. But in the case of a cover band, man, it would actually be good, because I think that as musicians, it's not easy. You can't just get money easily first off right out of school or play music unless you land some kind of very big act,
Yeah, well, we've talked about this before. There's no path.
There's no path.
There are other things you can major in school, and you sort of have a path. You're going to spend 4 years in college. You're going to intern at some company. Mm-hmm. That company's going to hire you. There's a path.
Mm-hmm.
Music, there's no path. Mm-hmm. You're out there with your machete, whacking the weeds away and finding a path for yourself. It's not easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's definitely one path. That's one path you can take. Mm-hmm. That is good. We should talk about that.
But
our next episode.
Yeah. But all that to say, most of the most impressive cover bands I've seen have been the ones that dress the part, and get into it and do what the performers themselves did. And at that point, you're really acting. You're really kind of getting into a different persona.
You start talking about like Yes cover bands or something, or Led Zeppelin cover bands. There's even a Dream Theater cover band out there. Finding 5 other people capable of playing that music is just astounding to me. But yeah, apparently it happened.
I guess if Dream Theater breaks up, the guys have a secondary gig.
Yeah, exactly.
Start their own cover band of themselves.
Start their own cover band. Well, they would all go out and have extraordinarily popular solo careers, I'm sure. Best bass player / keyboardist, like guitarist, drummer, and singer on the planet. Mm-hmm.
But I guess that was the whole point of this conversation. I think that given that we do have to carve our own paths, I think that there are some things you can do to embellish your impact and your performance.
Yeah, and remember that unless things have changed extraordinarily significantly since I was in college, and I teach college now, so I can pretty safely say they haven't.
Right, because you see these kids every day.
Right. Your college education, the lion's share of it is geared towards a style in which outward emotive expression is not prioritized. It's geared towards a Western classical tradition kind of style, the quote-unquote classical music. In many ways, it is, almost some of the greatest music in the world. Mm-hmm. But yeah, emotive expression is not prioritized in that style. And when you leave college, depending on what you do, you may find yourself working in a style of music where it definitely is. So that it is something that you should definitely think about.
Think about being a musician and think about being a performer. Well, I hope you guys found some of this useful. I think it's kind of interesting.
I found it useful. It was good.
It's something I didn't think about until later on in my career. Actually, I wasn't thinking about this when I was a freshman in college. So it's something it's one of those if I knew then what I know now things, and I'm happy to share this with you guys.
That's what we're here for.
There you go. Now get in front of that mirror and check out your performance chops. Have fun with it and let us know about it at info@musicstudent101.com.